Hello and welcome to RBA News Center. Today we will have the All Alliance Award from your host, Tampa RBA, and we are going to be sponsored the whole entire time by the Charlotte Red Jackets. Let's get started. For our All Foundation team, we have our kicker from the Nampa Golden Tigers, Trampon Pool, making no field goals. We have our linebacker from the Nampa Golden Tigers, Jacoby Klein, getting 17 games, 94 tackles, 4 interceptions, and a sack. Our defensive back from the Nampa Golden Tigers, Brendan Driscoll, getting 18 games and 27 tackles. We have our defensive lineman from the Petchigo Fire, getting 17 games and 122 tackles, is Walt Atkins. Offensive lineman from the Nampa Golden Tigers, Zachary Ashton, getting 14 games and 42 tackles. We have our wide receiver from Petishko Fire, Terry Vassley, playing 20 games, getting 130 receptions for 23 yards and 43 touchdowns. Our tight end from the Petishko Fire, Brad Alulau, getting 35 games and 7 touchdowns. We have our running back from the Spring Hill Snakes, Hayden Crosby, getting 13 games, 152 receptions, and 21 TDs. We have our QB from the Petishko Fire, Nelson Danielle, getting 17 games, completing 87% of his passes for 6,302 yards and 80 touchdowns. Next, we have our best all foundation. Coming in with 4 players is the Nampa Golden Tigers and the Petishko Fire. Next is our all ultimate team. We have our kicker from the Squirrels, O'Shane Ade, getting 17 games, completing 92% of his field goals for a total of 7 yards, and his longest being 63. We have our linebacker from the forward, Madison, Nick Durham, getting 140 tackles, an interception, and 3 sacks. We have our defensive back from the Scotty Booners, Tito Square, getting 16 games, 153 tackles, and 3 interceptions. We have our defensive lineman from the Ultimate Toasters, getting 19 games, 281 tackles, and 2 sacks. That is Vince Barron. We have our offensive lineman from the Squirrels, LaShawn Freeman, getting 16 games, 158 tackles. We have our wide receiver from the Milan Roadrunners, Desmond Pinion, getting 18 games for a total of 368 receptions and 4,155 yards and 50 TDs. We have our tight end from the Scotty Booners, Eric Forbes, playing 19 games, getting 95 receptions, 1,072 yards, and 19 touchdowns. We have our running back from the Squirrels, Jerry Dotson, playing 19 games, getting 278 completions, 1,213 yards, and 31 touchdowns. We have our quarterback from the New Orleans Voodoo, Wormley, playing 11 games, completing 88% of his completions for 4,017 yards and 66 touchdowns. Next we have as our best all ultimate with 3 players is the Squirrels. Next is all champions team. There was no kicker, but that is a destroying kicker. First up, we have our linebacker from the Texas Band Kids, Cyrus Milando, playing 19 games, getting 180 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 4 sacks. We have our defensive back from the Orlando Sentinels, Dean Gee, getting 16 games, 189 tackles, and 4 interceptions. We have our first string defensive back from the Gladiators, Trey Witten, getting 19 games, 209 tackles, and 4 interceptions. We have our defensive lineman from the Louisville Barbarians, Spencer Booker, playing 18 games, getting 256 tackles and 3 sacks. We have our wide receiver from the Texas Band Kids, Akeem Savage, playing 19 games, getting 239 receptions for a total of 4,599 yards and 67 touchdowns. We have our offensive lineman from Tampa, Kamoko Curvin, playing 19 games, getting 145 tackles. We have our tight end from the Cincinnati Goose, Walter Switzer, playing 17 games, getting 208 receptions for a total of 3,224 yards and 40 touchdowns. We have our running back from the PA Liberty, Gabe Gillespie, playing 17 games, getting 508 receptions for a total of 2,038 yards and 42 touchdowns. And our quarterback from Tampa, Devonta Gore, playing 10 games, getting 301 attempts, completing 278, which is 92%, for a total of 4,939 yards and 46 touchdowns. Our best all champions with 3 players each is Tampa and the Texas Bandits. Next up is our all-premier team. For our kicker, we have from the Gibbons, Buddha Smith, completing all of his field goals for a total of 331 yards and his longest being 52. We have our linebacker from the Chicago Rams, Ashawn Jewell, playing 19 games, getting 199 tackles, 2 picks, and 2 sacks. We have our defensive back from the Legionnaires, Lucas McKever, playing 18 games, getting 199 tackles and 9 picks and 0 sacks. We have our defensive lineman from the Tyrants, playing 19 games, getting 299 tackles and 5 sacks, is Xavier Lucas. We have our offensive lineman from the Seattle Sockeyes, Herb Gage, playing 16 games, getting 81 tackles. We had a wide receiver from Idaho Falls Kangaroos, Kyron Riley, playing 19 games, getting 372 receptions for a total of 30 yards and 95 TDs. We have our tight end from the Texas Stars, Jermaine DeVolve, getting 21 receptions, 313 yards, and 4 touchdowns. We have our running back from the Isotopes, Stephen Slade, playing 19 games, getting 81 receptions for a total of 1,105 yards and 29 touchdowns. And for our quarterback, you probably already know who it is. Deshaun Dahl, playing 19 games, completing 95% of his completions for a total of 8,557 yards, for a total of 132 touchdowns. And our best all-premier is 2 players is the Chicago Rams. Now our awards brought to you by the Alliance After Dark. We have our crowd favorite with 59.2% of the votes, the Chicago Rams. The best presentation of games with 93.45% of votes is the Red Jackets. The most Lion Spirit with 100% of the votes is the Texas Stars. Our best trash talk, for his second time with 55% of the votes, is the Aloof Balloons. Our quickest submitting on 5/16 at 55 past midnight Eastern Standard Time, is the Cincinnati Goose. Our best conference with 96-38 regular season points is the West. Mr. Miss Irrelevant with negative 171 points is the Practice Squad. Our Rookie of the Year with 380 regular season points is the Golden Tigers. Our regular season champions in the Foundation League is the Golden Tigers with 380 points. The Ultimate League is Vaporwave with 628 points. And the champions is the Cowboys with 796 points. And in the Premier is the Bobcats with 854 points. Those are your awards brought to you by the Alliance After Dark. Next is our All Alliance team brought to you by the Chicago Rams. Our second team, starting with our kicker from Gibbons from the Premier East, is Buddha Smith, completing 100% of his field goals for a total of 331 yards. Our second string linebacker from the Texas Bandkids in the Champions League is Lucas Short, getting 170 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 2 sacks. Our first string linebacker from the Marching Ants from the Premier West is Dane Infoot, getting 167 tackles, 3 interceptions, and 1 sack. Our second string defensive back from the Orlando Sentinels from the Champions League is Dean Yee, getting 189 tackles and 4 picks. Our first string defensive back from the Marching Ants from the Premier West is Hobbit Mary, getting 5 interceptions and 173 tackles. Our second string defensive lineman from the Tyrants is Kadar Minshew from the Premier West, getting 279 tackles and 3 sacks. Our first string defensive lineman from the Chicago Rams from the Premier West is Geneva Glenn. Our second string offensive lineman from the Seattle Sockeyes from the Premier West is Herb Gage. Our offensive lineman first string from Tampa in the Champions League is Kamoko Kirvan, getting 145 tackles. Our second string wide receiver from the middle, GA Bobcats in the Champions League is Teron Barkley, getting 214 receptions, 4,861 yards, and 69 touchdowns. Our first string wide receiver from the Chicago Rams from the Premier West is Cassius Ahai, getting 267 receptions for a total of 5,285 yards and 79 touchdowns. Our second string tight end from the Louisville Barbarians from the Champions League is Darren Webster, getting 98 receptions for a total of 1,330 yards and 19 touchdowns. Our first string tight end from Tampa from the Champions League is Nahib Balor, getting 91 receptions for a total of 1,420 yards and 20 touchdowns. Our second string running back from the Springfield Squirrels in the Foundation League is Connor Doyle, getting 185 receptions for a total of 1,639 yards and 27 touchdowns. Our first string running back from Tampa in the Champions League is Curtis Horsted, getting 110 receptions for a total of 22 touchdowns. Our second string quarterback from the Texas Bandkids in the Champions League is Adrian Anukau, getting 93% of his receptions completed, passing for 8,346 yards and 130 touchdowns. Our first string quarterback from the middle Georgia Bobcats from the Premier East is Paris Jackson, completing 90% of his completions for a total of 8,526 yards and 138 touchdowns. Our first team All-Alliance brought to you by the Chicago Rams. For our kickers, the Springfield Squirrels in the Ultimate League, O'Shane Ade, completing 92% of his field goals for a total of 567 yards. Our second string linebacker from the Chicago Rams from the Premier West is Shashawn Jewell, getting 199 tackles, 2 picks, and 2 sacks. Our first string linebacker from the Texas Bandkids from the Premier West is Cyrus Milano, getting 180 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 4 sacks. Our second string defensive back from the PA Liberty from the Ultimate League is Trey Witten, with 209 tackles and 4 interceptions. Our first string defensive back from the LA Legionnaires from the Premier West is Lucas McKever with 199 tackles and 9 interceptions. Our second string defensive lineman from the Idaho Falls Kangaroos from the Premier West is Leonard Kerr with 291 tackles and 5 sacks. Our first string defensive lineman from the Tyrants from the Premier West is Xavier Lucas, getting 299 tackles and 5 sacks. Our second string offensive lineman from the Springfield Squirrels in the Ultimate Team is Capri Carter with 158 tackles. Our first string offensive lineman from the Springfield Squirrels again from the Ultimate League is LaShawn Freeman with 158 tackles. Our second string wide receiver from the Arizona Vipers in the Premier West, Kittle, with a total of 504 receptions, 5,708 yards, and 91 touchdowns. Our string wide receiver from the Idaho Falls Kangaroos is Kyron Riley, getting 7,330 tackles and 95 touchdowns. Our second string tight end from the Gladiators in the Champions League is T.J. Poole, getting 101 receptions for a total of 25 touchdowns and 1,675 yards. Our first string tight end from the Cincinnati Goose in the Champions League is Walter Switzer, getting 208 receptions, 3,224 yards, and 40 touchdowns. Our second string running back from the PA Liberty in the Champions League, Gabe Geske, getting 158 receptions, over 2,000 yards, and 42 touchdowns. Our first string running back from the Springfield Squirrels, Jerry Dodson. Now, we're getting to our quarterbacks. This might get controversial. We have our second string quarterback from the Chicago Rams, Deshaun Dahl, completing 95% of his completions for a total of 8,557 yards and 132 touchdowns. Our first string quarterback from Tampa in the Champions League is Devonta Gore, completing 92% of his touchdowns, 4,039 yards, and 46 touchdowns. We picked him because he turned around Tampa's season. For our New York Pickles, best all-alliance ifs, the Springfield Squirrels, the Chicago Rams, and Tampa, all with 4 players. Next up is our best players. For our foundation most valuable player from the Nampa Golden Tigers is Titus Sigler, getting 113 attempts, completing 626 of them for a total of 6,287 yards and 87 touchdowns. We have our ultimate most valuable player from the Milwaukee Vaporwaves, Dane Pokic, for a total completing 90% of his completions for a total of 112 yards, touchdowns, and 7,130 yards. We have our champions most valuable player from Tampa, Devonta Gore, completing 92% of his completions for a total of 4,039 yards and 46 touchdowns. Our premier MVP from the Middle Georgia Bobcats, Paris Jackson, completing 90% of his attempts for a total of 8,526 yards and 138 touchdowns. Our Alliance Defensive Player of the Year from the LA Legionnaires from the Premier West is Lucas McKever, getting 199 tackles and 9 interceptions. Our Offensive Player of the Year from the Idaho Falls Kangaroos is Kyron Riley, getting 327 receptions for a total of 7,330 yards and 95 touchdowns. And our most valuable player, and I'll give you a hint, it's not Deshaun Dahl. It but it is the Deshaun Dahl Award. From the Middle GA Bobcats is Paris Jackson, completing 90% of his attempts for a total of 8,526 yards and 138 touchdowns. That is all for the All Alliance Awards. Thank you for watching.